This is Damian Pardo, and welcome to the Forward Miami Show. For those of you that don't know, Forward Miami is a local nonprofit here in Miami, Florida, and we work with issues, diversity, and inclusion. And I'm very happy today to have as my guest, Christine Hellman, who's joining us from Asheville, North Carolina. And Christine, you and I had the pleasure of having a conversation, which kind of led to this whole episode that we're exchanging now. And I wondered if you could share with us just a little bit about, just your background, where you come from, how you ended up there, and get to know you.
That's a long road. I'll give you the short version.
Okay.
Yeah, like David said, we had this wonderful conversation the other day that kind of led us to this point. But I am, first off, a woman and a mother and a person in long-term recovery from substance abuse, and an actor and a playwright.
Wow.
Yeah, so there's a lot in there, but it all comes from my, life experience. I'm originally from Charlotte, North Carolina, and have moved around, spent a lot of time in New York, and now am raising my daughter in Asheville.
Well, I mean, I found our conversation super intriguing because in Miami, there's so many people in recovery and so many different kinds of issues here that really play into diversity and inclusion, because it's a very large population and it's people who often are not thought of or included in many different ways. And I think that's where we started, having that conversation about, as a society, how can we do better with issues of addiction and with issues involving recovery?
Yes.
And, I know you obviously have a story with that. And maybe you could share some of that with us.
Absolutely. I saw a quote yesterday, and I've never seen anything that rang more true. It said, trauma is the gateway drug. You can't just say no when your body is in survival mode. And I thought that summed up so much of my experience as a person in recovery. I was born into what I thought was a normal middle-class family.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but what you just said, like I'm still processing.
I know.
I'm still kind of processing that trauma is a gateway drug.
Yes. Addiction comes from somewhere, and a lot of what we know about addiction is what we know now is that there's a genetic component, that it's classified as a disease. But what we're starting to really understand is that there's a perfect storm, the genetic component, but there's also so many people who suffer from addiction also suffer from trauma, childhood trauma especially.
And when you're talking about addiction, I mean, you're talking about everything from food to sex to actual, drugs,
yes,
to shopping for some people. I mean, it's a very broad.
Yeah, well, addiction, I think about it this way in my own body, that this addiction, I like to talk about the addict archetype, right? Because it's so mythic, and we all think we have stereotypes about who the addict is. But the intention, this core intention of the addict, is subconscious. It's to regulate something that is missing, right? So as a child, if there was trauma in my life, which there was, repeated trauma, my nervous system was trying to regulate something, trying to stay safe, trying to hide, trying to calm down, all of those things. And my first addiction was reading fantasy books. That was my first. I would hide away and read stories for hours and hours and hours. I didn't play with other children. I read books. And then after that, then it was food. And then
nobody would ever think of that as an addiction.
Right. But it's so common. Talk to so many addicts, and there's childhood things, fantasy books, hiding away. It could have been television, especially for a younger generation now that's more prevalent. But yeah, it's that escapism.
I mean, Instagram could be an addiction, or social media, or,
Oh yeah. And then talk about, social media, we're just skipping over even an escape to just a dysregulated system. We're just zoning out. We're just fight or flight, lying dead, that's it with social media. That's it. I don't even fully understand that one, because I'm thankful that I didn't have it when I was a child.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And I think, I do think that it's one thing leads to another. I think that my body as a child was really seeking something out to keep me safe or to hide. I think about it sometimes. It may sound silly, but I think about it as my heart as a child was, we come in this world kind of shining brightly, whoever we are, our authentic selves. And then things happen in life that teach us that we need to find safety. that teach us that in order to survive our household, then we need to act a certain way. And so we begin to hide. And I think of it like as this hiding, and then you're looking for little corners where you can be yourself or act a way in which isn't acceptable in your household. And I think, for me, reading fantasy books, it was like these amazing adventures and these people with these big personalities. And I just wish that I could be them. I wish I could be anyone other than myself as a child, for sure.
Wow. And I see you as a person with a very big personality. I mean, I think that's ironic, because you were definitely escaping.
Oh yeah. And I was
hiding.
terribly shy. I was afraid of everything and everyone. And I think it's interesting. Of course, it says on my bio here, I'm an actor and a playwright. How on earth did that happen? And I don't even know sometimes, except I think that there was something inside of me that, started with these fantasy books. And then I didn't want to get up in front of anyone, but the idea of escaping into a character was very exciting to me because I didn't have to be myself, but I could have big feelings and I could live these different lives and explore these emotional states, but I was protected because I didn't have to be myself.
Wow. I mean, that's very deep, in that sense that you were actually coping.
Yes, for sure. And I think that's true with a lot of artists. There's a lot of research now about artists, especially in recovery. There's so many artists who suffer from addiction. And I believe that a lot of it has to do with this sort of nervous system regulation. If I'm an artist and I'm delving into these, I'm playing Juliet and I'm dying every night on stage, that my body doesn't know the difference between this love at first sight, all of these dramatic things that are happening, these high stakes scenarios. My body doesn't know the difference. And so it's really hard for actors to come down from that and not be confused in their own systems. And a lot of actors are drinking drugs, anything to sort of regulate that nervous system. And it's not even a conscious decision half the time.
Wow. And, when we were talking, I was really intrigued by the whole idea that what you do as an actor and what you do, in that life can actually serve as a form of therapy for people struggling with addiction and coming out of addiction. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. Well, a lot of people say that theater is, we call it doctor theater, so it's very therapeutic for people to get up on stage or even just rehearse, be in the process. And it's so multifaceted. I feel like I've been really lucky that at different parts of my life, theater has come back in. So when I was in my active addiction, I was in drama school and very much in this, like, pain is suffering and suffering is art. And that is how I will be an artist. And that's how I can live as a human. And when I got clean, when I was 22 years old, I thought that I could not participate in theater anymore because it was a scary place to be. I used a lot of drugs. Now, if this pain was going to go away, then how could I be a good artist? How could I make this happen? And it took a really long time for me to start to understand the idea that by exploring human behavior, even if it's not my own, that there's a great power in that. And the power in that is I can better understand. Actors are like detectives. We're always looking at human behavior. Oh, what does this person want when they say this? What do they want? What do they want? Well, when we start to flip that back to the self and say, like, oh, this is how I walk around most of the time. What am I trying to get? What do I want in this situation? What am I trying to cover up? It's very therapeutic to start to be able to have this space and clarity to sort of see yourself a little bit as a character. As you gain empathy and compassion for yourself, you can do that with other people or characters in a play. And then that can translate to people in your community. If I see myself with non-judgment, then I can look at you curious with that same non-judgment and wonder and sort of talk and create art around it and think about why we do the things we do. It's fascinating.
And what I love about that is that it has real application just to the general issues of diversity and inclusion. Because one of the reasons that diversity and inclusion is not the best, an easy goal to get to, is because people rarely understand other people's traumas or other people in general. They're very good at understanding themselves, but that whole non-judgment piece that you just talked about is kind of absent from society.
Absolutely.
And, the more I think just as a society, the more we try to reflect on that, the more we can be compassionate with ourselves and other people, the more we get to a place where, diversity and inclusion is just normal. We don't need to even say the words.
Well, there's so much fear around really taking a look at someone else because, my mentor who is teaching me in a technique called the lucid body, she always says, the personal is the universal. When I am really stepping forward in my truth, then people identify with that no matter if they look like me or not. If someone is stepping forward just as they are, I'm going to identify, something in my body is going to identify with that. And it makes it much easier for me to be curious about the details, even though the details, matter sometimes and don't matter sometimes, depending on the context. It's the person. So if we can step out of that fear just a little bit, then it goes such a long way. And I started learning that in recovery because I was in 12-step programs in rooms with people who were nothing like me at all of people from different walks of life. And it was sort of it's the rule, it's the rule that everybody is here for the same reason. So judgment doesn't have a place here. And I'm grateful for that because that now has translated to every part of my life.
And we were talking a little bit about how some of those kind of staid systems and techniques that we've had to deal with recovery really have kind of not met, the bill.
Yes.
And maybe you can reflect a little bit on that and how some of the strategies you're talking about now are kind of the next generation of strategies in dealing with recovery and addiction.
Yeah. 12-step programs aren't that old, and they were created by white Christian middle-class men for white Christian middle-class men. That was the demographic. And, when you take a look at some of the books, some of the literature, it is written to white middle-class married men who have wives at home to support them. And, there's so much privilege in that. And I find it hard sometimes to sort of separate that, even though all of these programs have come such a long way, but the principles are spiritual, right? The things that we're learning, it's like any religion or group. The spiritual principles are the important things, but we have to adapt them to our society today. If I am constantly stepping into a room with all white middle-class men, there's things I cannot talk about. I don't feel safe. I can talk about addiction because we suffer from the same disease, but I can't come in and talk about my trauma as a woman. That's not a safe space for me. The same thing with the LGBTQ community. You can't just walk in and share everything that you want in a room of people who don't look and feel the way that you do about certain things. People of color. There's just such a place for having space to have that identification, and we're getting better. But I also think that we're not looking at the why. And for so long, the why was not important in these programs. We don't care why you did what you did. We just want to help, which is a nice idea. But there's so much behind the addiction, going back to the trauma. The why is really important because that leads to the real healing. If I can figure out the why in myself, then I can really start moving forward. These loops in my brain that have been doing the same thing since I was a child start to change. But that takes community, and that takes people who understand me.
And what do you think of, when you're saying that, I feel like I should do that too. You know what I mean? Like, what is the why that you're kind of referencing there? Like why you became an addict or why you exhibited a certain behavior that was harmful to yourself?
So I can only speak for me as a woman. So my trauma as a child, of course, it was, forget what they call it. It's like lots of trauma, whatever the term is for that. That's what my therapist says. There was a lot of abuse in my household, sexual abuse. And so specifically that, as a child, I learned to be ashamed of myself, to not speak out, to always think that everything was my fault, to always understand that I would be punished for using my voice. So that created my truth as a child. And my brain wasn't even fully formed, but that locked into my limbic system. That was now my emotional story. So now everything that I did as I got older was based around that shame and that guilt. And then everyone in my family comes from addiction. So add in that. This is how we don't talk about our feelings, but we drink over them. So don't talk about it. Tell us you're fine. And then then when I found people who were using, I thought that was like the magic cure. It made everything different because I'm so shameful. I'm so guilty. And that, when I started using drugs, it took that away for a minute.
It really took that away. It took that away.
At first, it sure did. I often think if I wouldn't have found drugs at the age that I did, I was 12 years old and I began using, I was using every day by the time I was 14. I often think that if I hadn't found drugs, sounds so counterproductive. I don't know that I would be alive if I hadn't found that escape in the beginning. But the problem was I wasn't taught any other tools. So that escape became my life. And by the time I was 19 years old, I was in and out of hospitals and addicted to heroin in New York City for years. I mean, so the progression of that, it's so hard. It's so hard to think that now I'm grateful. I wouldn't want it any other way. I'm so grateful that I had that experience at a young age, because now at almost 40, I have almost 18 years clean and I have a whole new life.
Congratulations, by the way. That's huge.
Thank you. Yeah, it is.
It is. It is. I mean,
I think, go ahead.
I can't relate to that because that hasn't been my journey, but I think almost anyone can relate to addictions. I mean, certainly food for me has been something like that. And I've tried to go through that idea in my mind of why am I having dulce de leche ice cream? Like, it's bad for me, but my system, I will cut to have that ice cream right now, and for whatever reason, I can't stop myself in that certain moment. And I know it's somewhat triggered by either emotions or a situation. And I also kind of intuitively know that it probably goes back to childhood. So it's kind of, easier to understand how those bigger consequences that come from chemical addictions, dealing with drugs, can really lead anyone, down a certain path.
Yes. I think our body and our brain want to keep us safe. They want to keep us comfortable. It's working. Even I might say, I don't need that ice cream, but my body is saying, like, it's going to make you feel better. It's going to make you feel good. And I think of my body and my brain as my protector, even if it's not very logical sometimes.
Yeah. No, and in that moment, it is going to make you feel better, and it is going to make you safe, and it is going to, in that moment. But long term, it's putting you, in a worse situation.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that sort of brings us around to this idea of the gift of having that desperation, of having an addiction, of having had to hit a bottom, and then being able to gain clarity from it. I feel like if I hadn't have gone through those experiences, I wouldn't have such an understanding of myself today. But that takes a lot of space to be able to get to that place. Years of recovery, years of therapy, years of art. And I recognize that I am very privileged to have had any of those things, because when we're in survival mode, when we're in active addiction, when we're in a poverty environment, when, all of the factors, even being able to get to the place where we can find a little bit of space to breathe in our body is next to impossible. So it seems like a giant feat to get to a place where I can be like, oh yeah, I can really look back and see things. And I think that's where I'm at in my life as a recovering person and an artist, is I just want to be able to make accessible the things that were made accessible to me, because they're not available to everyone.
No, that's a good point. I mean, you're saying that, you came out on the other side, but I mean, obviously Miami has a very large population that deals with addiction. In the LGBTQ community, part of my community, I see that a lot. And it's difficult because a lot of people don't come out of that. No. They have moments, they have periods where they try and they do, and for a bit, and they come back in, and most of their life is spent in that, in and out. And when you talk about, privilege, which I guess in my mind, privilege is just not having a lot of those other issues. For a lot of people, they're not a woman. They don't really have that issue on top of everything else. They still may have a lot of trauma and a lot of issues, but that's not one of the ones that they carry. If they're not LGBTQ, well, then that's not one of the ones that they carry. Or if they're not poor or a person of color, or, whatever the case might be, they're all coming from a place of extra baggage, trying to come out on the other side. And I think, that's why it's so hard. And that's why I tell you so sincerely, congratulations, because I know many people that haven't made it. They haven't, they're not where you're at, nowhere near. I think you're amazing because you're working on a technique to help people be able to make it to where you're at.
Yeah.
Well,
and I think, so it's interesting because among people in recovery, we talk about this. What was the moment that helped you to stop using? What was this magic moment where all of a sudden you had been using and you had never been able to get clean before, and now all of a sudden you could? And I always think of mine as this moment of desperation where I had just exhausted all options and I was done. And I don't, higher power, whatever you want to call it, there was an exhaustion there that I was either going to die or I was going to change. And for me, I was able to change. But I think, and that's a lot of people's experience, but there's also a huge part of our community that can never get to that magic moment, can never get past that, or there's a moment of clarity and then they go back out. But it's all reactivity. It's all this, like, we're still stuck in this loop of, even though I want to be clean, I don't want to do this anymore, I don't want to live this life anymore, I cannot stop. My brain will not let me get through the day without finding what I need to help me survive, because my body is telling me that I need to survive. And I think that where I come in with how I approach my art and the people that I work with is this idea of, well, what would happen if we didn't have to be so concerned with that moment of exhaustion and clarity, but even inside of the substance use or the trauma, bad situation, we could start to get curious about our body, get curious about this truth, which is my heart is beating, my breath is coming in and out. In a lot of ways, it's mindfulness, but the idea that there is something inside of myself that I can trust, even though it's been years, maybe my whole life, that I am not a trustworthy person, that people have told me I cannot be trusted. And I've believed that. So everything I think and say and do is a lie and terrible, and I'm a horrible person. But that's not the truth, because my body is working. And there is this magic thing about simplicity for me. When I start to breathe and notice that breath and notice a thought, then I can begin to practice just noticing it and really understanding the idea that my feelings are not facts. My thoughts are not the truth all the time. And that's free. Like, that is accessible. The idea of just taking the time to be able to get in touch, have a space where it's safe enough to just be for a little while without having to take care of your children or take care of being here and there and working, just finding moments where that's available. And it seems so simple, but I think it's so powerful.
Oh, no. I mean, it seems very powerful. Mm-hmm. What if you are someone like me who has friends that are addicted to substances that are incredibly harmful, and you want to try to help? Or if I were to bring someone to you, what would be some of the first conversations you would have?
I would just want to listen without judgment, because it is so hard as an addict, especially in active addiction. I told myself lies for years. I didn't know what the truth was. And I would tell you anything you wanted to hear so I could get out of this conversation you're talking about having, for sure. Really? Right. Yeah. But there is a felt sense sometimes when you can be available for someone with this non-judgmental mind, right? If I sit with someone and I say, maybe I know some of what you're going through, maybe some of it I don't, but I definitely understand the feeling, and I can be here and you can just talk about it and I'm not going to judge. That's the first thing. Just having that space to speak. I'm not trying to fix it.
So as a friend, that's something I could do. I mean, I could do that.
Yeah.
I can sit there and, happily, and not judge. And then
and not try to problem solve either. Well, you know what you could do? Here's my idea. I think if you did this and this and this, I think that one's
going to be harder for me not to do. The guy kind of takes over there. Well, let's fix it. But but as you see that person, or as someone kind of reaching out and entering these kind of, exploring these kind of techniques,
Mhm.
what would be a next step? What would it look like? I'm trying to figure out, like, how do you know how, like, we know there's 12 steps or whatever, like, are there steps to this? What would this look like for someone succeeding in it?
You know, I don't have a road to recovery. I don't think anyone does. I don't think anyone has, this is the plan that's going to work for everybody. 12 steps have served that purpose for a really long time. But I think that for me, there's something very special about peer support. I am an addict. Here are the things that I have done. And here are the things that I see working in other people's lives. And here are a lot of options. There's programs now that are more therapy based. There's programs that are yoga based, mindfulness based. There's a wealth of things now. And if I, as an addict, a recovering addict, am sitting with someone and I say, like, I've been doing this thing and it's been making me feel pretty good. Do you want to do it with me? Right? It's just, it's like taking someone by the hand and saying, like, I got you. I got you. And
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I was just thinking a little bit of our conversation on community and the importance of community, understanding this, and a community, and understanding this community in particular. As an example, we were talking about events that are out there and creating spaces that are fun, where people can just get a mocktail, or, and still feel like they can go somewhere and participate without necessarily putting themselves in a situation that might help them slip back to some place they don't want to be.
Well, and that's our responsibility as recovering addicts. There's a lot of, of course, the programs have been anonymous up until this point. And I have found radical growth by saying, no, this is who I am and this is my experience. And I'm out in the world. I'm out in the community. I'm hosting these events. I'm a playwright. I have a whole play that's written for addicts and alcoholics. Come and see it. There's no bar. Like, come hang out. It's making our faces known and taking away the stigma of addiction, not hiding, being like, oh, I had that problem too. We'll go talk and hide in a corner. No, like, it's nothing to be ashamed of at this point.
Absolutely not.
It's growing all the time. And there's so many spaces now that thankfully you and I were talking about, this idea of having an event where mocktails are served. Do you know how good I feel when I see a mocktail menu? It just makes me feel like I can go and be a normal person and I don't have to explain why I don't drink.
Yeah.
There's a lot of power in that.
I think what you're saying is so important, because to anyone listening out there that runs events or organizations that have events, and all organizations, corporations, nonprofits, everyone has events out there, put in a mocktail option.
Yes.
That's such a nice way of acknowledging people who could really use support in those ways.
And it takes people into, I think that I was really lucky in my acting community. I was really nervous when I got back into theater. I was 10 years clean before I got back into the theater scene, because I didn't want to be around the partying afterwards. I was really afraid of hanging out in the bar after a show. And that kept me away from what I love to do for a really long time.
Wow.
And I found someone in recovery in the theater, and it made me feel safe. And then our theater started to put in protocols about drinking and using at the theater, when it was appropriate and when it was not, making announcements about, like having nights that were sponsored by different recovery groups. And those were recovery nights at the theater. So all of these changes, it's like finding the people in the community that you love makes it so much easier to be a part of the world again, because recovery can be pretty isolating. Addiction especially is so isolating. So it's about a larger community approach, I think.
And what kind of, I don't want to say advice, but what kind of steps or ideas can you share for people who might be struggling with addiction? Like, where should they reach out? Do you have certain website or numbers, or what are some good ideas for them to maybe think about and consider?
Yeah. Well, one, you're not alone. You're not alone. There are a lot of people who have dealt with this and come out on the other side. And there's so many resources, no matter what community you're in. You can Google You can Google, there will be hotlines for every different 12-step program. There will be hotlines. You will, if you Google it, there are Buddhist meetings for recovering people. I mean, there is yoga for addicts. There are just things now. It's so incredible. So whatever community you are in, Miami, Asheville, give it a Google and you will see. It's that simple now, which is pretty amazing.
And Christine, what about if people wanted to kind of link with you to explore the techniques that you're developing, really, which are kind of extremely innovative? I'm very excited because I love anything like that. I think it's very forward thinking, and I think it has legs. So if people wanted to reach out and somehow connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, yeah, this work is exciting. So you can go to miseriesoptionalplay.com. And all of my information is on there. And this is a play written by people in recovery, taken from interviews from people recovering from addiction and alcoholism. And it is all their stories. And we tour this play around. We take it to different communities. We're actually this summer going to do what we're calling our service tour. And we're going to take this play into different treatment centers so that people can hear their own stories repeated back to them. This is a verbatim play. Everything is just word for word from these people's experiences. And that's sort of the jumping off point for all the work that I do. And then from there, there's other projects that I have, which you could contact me from the website. I'm doing a project right now that's all about the addict as the hero on the hero's journey. So taking us out of this corner and putting us in this mythic adventure. It's for artists in recovery. So we're going to explore parts of self around these archetypes and what does it mean to be the hero of our own story. It's very exciting. Yeah.
Oh, wow. That sounds great. I am going to make you spell the website.
Yes. So Misery is Optional Play. So MiseriesOptionalPlay.com. Miseriesoptionalplay.com.
And if people want to link up with you, and maybe, are you going to be in Miami, South Florida, and Florida, or not yet?
I love being in Miami. There's actually there's a yoga studio. I believe it's called 305 Yoga. And there are a lot of recovering folks who hang out there. I did a really cool trauma-informed workshop with these folks. It was amazing. So yeah, I'd love to be back down in Miami anytime.
Well, we would love to have you here. I told you that our half hour goes by like that. And, we'll come back at some other time because there's just so much more to talk about. I appreciate your time. And for everyone out there, thank you for joining the Forward Miami show. And we look forward to seeing you again next week.